Well, as I pointed to last night, the federal government has clearly decided to ramp up its pushback against China. It's not aggressive, it's not retaliatory, it's rather subtle and in line, I would have thought, with any normal international expectation. Yesterday, the Prime Minister and two senior ministers used words like not backing down, it's a breach of trade laws, and it's clearly discriminatory. Well, today, their raised rhetoric matched their actions. We're lodging a case before the World Trade Organisation.
Advised their Chinese counterparts of Australia's intention to request formal consultations with China in relation to the application of anti-dumping and countervailing duties against the Australian barley industry. We will make those formal requests through the WTO tonight. We've applied at every step of this journey all of the appropriate processes, procedures and courtesies to the manner in which Australia and Australian industries have engaged with the Chinese government and their Chinese counterparts.
Now, up until today, the government has mentioned the availability of going to the WTO, but there was no real sign they would. And it's important Australians appreciate that this is not really about trying to reverse unfair and coercive bans and tariffs imposed on our exports by China. These contests are usually very long and very drawn out, and they rarely reach a judgment or enforcement before diplomacy between two countries finds a solution itself. Of course, it's hard to enact diplomacy right now when the Chinese are having too much fun listening to the messages left on their answering machines from Australian ministers. But this is a pushback. Make no doubt about that. A sign that Australia won't be bullied and is prepared to ask the international umpire on trade to intervene. And more than that, it highlights to other potential trading partners with China that they can't keep their promises.
Australia is not the first country to see China apply different trade sanctions against them that appear to lack justification if you just look at the trade elements of the relationship. And so that heightened risk profile is one that all businesses around the world potentially face, which means it's a bad outcome for China and the Chinese economy, as well as for economies like ours around the world.
In other words, it's a fairly loud message to the rest of the world. You too can come a gutser due to Chinese obstinance. As for the next step, the government has strongly indicated that it does not favour a tit-for-tat trade war and is not inclined to place a levy on our iron ore exports. But business writer Robert Gottliebsen told me on 2GB this morning that if China elects to place tariffs on our wool, which some are saying is their next move, he says it's time for action. He says we should use China's dependence on our iron ore to threaten a possible price increase.
It's time to say to the Chinese, you take us on wool and we're actually going to hit you back so hard you'll never forget it. And we have a weapon. And the Chinese know we've got that weapon, and it's called iron ore. In terms of dollars, the price of iron ore has risen so far that we're getting far more dollars from iron ore than we're losing on those other products. It's quite. You don't just suddenly put an export tax on iron ore or something like that, but quietly tell the Chinese, if you're going to keep this up, then that's exactly what we'll do.
Now, if Australia's submission to the WTO tonight is a veiled appeal for international support, well, they can rely on more to come next year, because today, British PM Boris Johnson invited Australia to attend the G7 summit in the middle of next year. India and South Korea have also been invited with Australia. Now, this could be a turning point for not just Australia's trade problems with China, but it could be a platform from which these 10 most wealthy economies launch sanctions against China. Now, at the very least, it'll provide those 10 governments with an opportunity to increase trade opportunities between themselves outside of a reliance on China. As I said last night, the solution to this impasse could be finding strength in numbers.